Hi, I'm Debbie Miller with Christie's International Real Estate here in Fort Worth. And if you've read a headline this month about the Texas housing market cooling off, or you've seen it on the news, that inventory is piling up, buyers are finally getting some leverage, I want you to hit pause before you apply any of that news headlines to Dallas-Fort Worth, because that's not exactly what's happening right here. Texas Real Estate Research Center just put out their latest Texas Housing Insight Report. And yes, the statewide trends are real. Inventory's up, prices are softening, buyers are gaining ground, but the DFW market is not moving at the same pace as the rest of the state. And if you're buying or selling or just trying to figure out what your home is worth right now, that difference matters. Let's break that down. Inventory's growing, just not as fast here. So first, let's talk about inventory, because this is where DFW really separates itself from the rest of Texas. Every major metro area in the state saw active inventory increase in April. That's not the question, but look at the size of that increase, because this is where it gets interesting. San Antonio saw inventory jump 12.5% year over year. Houston came in at 7%, and Austin was up 3.2%. And Dallas-Fort Worth, we saw the smallest increase of any major Texas metro at just 0.4%. That's not a small gap. That's the difference between a market where sellers are genuinely losing leverage and a market that's holding its ground. So what does that actually tell us? It tells us buyer demand here is still relatively steady. Homes aren't sitting because nobody wants them. They're sitting because the process of deciding which house is taking longer. That's a real difference between those two things, and it's one buyers and sellers both need to understand. So for buyers, this means you do have more homes to choose from than you did a year or two ago. You have room to be selective and a little picky. You have room to negotiate, but you don't have the kind of flood of inventory that's showing up in San Antonio or Houston. So don't walk into a DFW negotiation expecting Houston level leverage. It's just not the same market. For sellers, this means the game has changed, but it hasn't collapsed. You still have buyers out there. What's changed is how you have to show up to get their attention. Here's the part I really want you to hear if you're thinking about selling. Homes across the state, well, they're taking longer to sell right now. But here's the thing that surprised me a little when I read this report. It's not because the sellers are flooding the market with new listings. New listing volume isn't the driver. The driver is buyers taking more time to make a decision. They're looking at more homes. They're comparing them. They're sitting with it longer before they write an offer. That's what's letting the inventory build gradually, month over month. So if buyers are slower to commit, how are sellers keeping deals moving? Well, that would be price. In Dallas-Fort Worth, the median seller price reduction has hit $12,500. So that's about 3% off of the original list price. And I want to be really clear about what that number means, because I don't think it means what a lot of sellers fear it means. It doesn't mean the market's falling apart. It means pricing strategy has become the single biggest lever sellers have right now. The seller who gets this right, who prices the house correctly from day one instead of testing the market high and chasing it down, they're the ones who avoid becoming a stale listing that needs a public price cut later. And if you've listed a home before and it just felt like buyers weren't responding, this is probably why. It's not that the DFW buyers have disappeared. It's that they're taking their time, and pricing is what earns their attention in this window. Now, let's flip to the buyer side, because if you've been waiting for your moment, this is worth paying attention to. As inventory expands and homes sit a little longer on the market, buyers are getting some leverage that just wasn't available a few years ago. More homes to choose from, sellers who are a little more willing to negotiate on price, on closing costs, on repairs, on the timeline. A market that's steadier and more balanced than the frantic pace we saw just a few years ago. That doesn't mean it's a free-for-all. DFW is still holding up better than most of the state, which means you're not going to walk into a room full of desperate sellers, but you are walking into more conversations than before, and more conversations means more room to actually negotiate instead of just competing on price and hoping somebody buys it. This is exactly why having someone who reads the local market for you matters more than ever right now. Statewide headlines are not going to tell you what's happening on a specific street in Crestwood or in Southwest Cleburne. The data moves at the metro level. Your decision has to be made at the neighborhood level, and honestly, sometimes it's a street by street level. So let's zoom back out for a second. Dallas-Fort Worth is still one of the more stable markets in the state. Inventory is growing, but it's slow and slower than every other major metro area. Buyers have more options than they've had in years, but demand is still steady enough to keep this from turning into a buyer's free-for-all. And sellers who are willing to price competitively are still finding success. They're just having to work a little smarter to get there. If you're a seller, here's the takeaway. It's really simple. Get the pricing right the first time. Don't test the market up high hoping somebody falls in love with it. Buyers are patient right now, and patient buyers wait for the price to be right. If you're a buyer, the takeaway is just as simple. You have more leverage than you've had in a good long while, but DFW is not a market where you can lowball and expect it to land. Come in informed, come in ready, and let the local data guide your offer, not the statewide headlines. So look at the statewide numbers, and that makes for a good headline. But real estate doesn't happen at the state level, unless you're in Rhode Island maybe. It happens on your street. It happens in your neighborhood. It happens with your specific home or the specific home you're trying to buy. So if you're wondering what any of this actually means for your situation, whether that's your home and what it would sell for right now, what kind of negotiating room you actually have, as a buyer, that's a conversation I would genuinely love to have with you. No fluff, just real talk about where things stand. I'm Debbie Miller with Christie's International Real Estate here in Fort Worth, and it matters who you work with. So reach out and let's figure out your next move together.